Well, hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, recruiters, and one actor, as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And today, Dr. Jeremy, we're going to take a little look at adaptive leadership and providing strategies for success in turbulent environments. Um, Seems like we're living in turbulence, and the world of work continues to change. The pandemic and the lockdown was a huge awakening for a lot of people. Some different modes of work came into being. We started to look at remote and hybrid working. Leadership has always been an issue, but now you actually have to navigate through all of these changes. And you see a lot of organizations out there struggling, almost not doing anything because they don't know which direction to move. So, what advice can you give us on how do we navigate all of these changes which are coming so quickly? I mean, even before the recording, we were talking a little bit about AI and Dr. Martha's new book. Um, and so, so much information coming. I've talked to organizations who, especially with something like AI, they don't even want to look at it because they're so worried about what could happen. And change is hard. Change means we have to adapt. And I don't see a lot of adapters out there right now.
As usual, so we got some interesting articles which are going to be in the show notes, and I uploaded a doc here for the people that are live. Any of these can be used for, hey, it's a blueprint. We say it often, and there's a couple different things that I was thinking, a couple different I guess to get us into the right mindset that we can start off with. So we talk about turbulent times. And sometimes we don't know when we're in a turbulent time because it's basically a slow burn. And if we really think about it, aren't we always in some kind of a turbulent time? I started thinking about if you're in a plane and the pilot comes on and he says, "Hey, we're reaching some turbulence." We don't really get scared. Turbulence, it could be a storm. We know when to get scared and we know when the leadership is necessary. So when we think about it, there's a couple different articles, and there was an interesting part here. Let me take give me a moment of silence.
Well, while you're looking that up, you mentioned planes, and for a lot of organizations, remember Alaska Air and the panel that popped off? Sort of feels like that for a lot of organizations where we're strapped into our seats. There's a hole in the plane. We think we're going to make it back to the airport, but there's no guarantees. And I'm guessing a lot of businesses are feeling like that right now.
Yeah, and so that moment, like you said, when it's in an extreme episode or an extreme event. There was some research on extreme events where the author of this publication was saying, okay, let's look at some of the research on it. There wasn't a whole lot. As of 2009, the main researcher in the area found only 2 articles looking at leadership in extreme events. Now, it's going to be a little different than turbulent times, because at turbulent times, we're looking at kind of an outstretch, more of a slow burn than extreme events. But it's interesting here because they define an extreme event as a discrete episode or occurrence that may result in an extensive or intolerable magnitude of physical, psychological, or material consequences to, or in close physical or psychosocial proximity to organizational members. Again, long definition. But if we look at turbulent times, we can change a discrete episodes to a series of discrete episodes or a series of occurrences. It's interesting too that after 2009, the person that was in this main article, they found 373 academic articles from between 2010 to 2023 that were referencing this other author from pre 2009 and starting to catch on with leadership in extreme times, because they also mentioned, okay, look, it's really in these extreme contexts that leaders and leadership are most needed. So there's a couple of different things to think about. One, if you're a manager, it's important to say, really to get give your employees an idea of how they already adapt to change, for example. people might say, look, I don't want change. I like things the way they are. A response might be, in better terms, do you have the same cell phone you were using 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Do you have a different CPU speed? Are you using different apps? People are good at change, but they need to be excited about it and helping them understand, like, look, you're good at change. Here are some of the things that have changed. Here's how you've adapted to it, and here's how we can continue to do that. When you look at people going through turbulent times individually, they can just push through it. And then you have the inherent negatives like undue stress, poor decisions, and all these unwanted outcomes, or they can adopt some kind of a framework. And that's what we look at when we're looking at this research with actual events. One of the articles was looking at how Norwegian leaders kept their companies, their organizations together during the COVID lockdowns, et cetera, et cetera. And they actually found that they were enthusiastic about it because they finally had an opportunity to make good change. And it's also interesting if you're an organization and you're saying, oh, we're hitting some turbulent times or maybe one identifiable event, maybe it's not turbulent times per se. Maybe it's just finally that tipping point to a lot of the things that have been on the back burner in the first place. And you finally have that opportunity that people, yes, can get excited about, even though there's a fear of uncertainty. And I'm sure we'll get into, how do you deal with that uncertainty, especially in turbulent times? It's no different than when somebody starts an organization. The main thing that keeps them from hitting the ground running is this uncertainty. They don't know, who's who, what exactly they're going to doing, what their day-to-day looks like. But just with a new employee, how you can start to help them vision out, even perhaps in the interview process of this is what it actually looks like to work here. When you're in turbulent times, look, if you're a leader, you might not know what the next day is going to look like or what the next year is going to look like. But if you can get people together and start to get those ideas generated, the people working more closely together, the communication better, you're going to be on that lifeboat together, and you can start to envision out, if we do X, here's going to be some likely results, and how do we steer towards those likely results that we want during these times.
Well, that's a great process already. But what I usually see in organizations is change is coming, and it's usually the the frontline employees, they can feel it. They know it's happening. Sometimes leadership will go, change is coming. We're talking about it. We're talking about how the change is going to affect you. And when we've made a decision, we'll get back to you. Not a lot of organizations actually involve those employees in those discussions.
And there's probably a good argument as to why. If you're looking at just the operations of a business, they need to keep going because we look at the difference between managing and leading. Some things just do need to be managed. People need to continue to do their day-to-day job without having it's weird, right? Here's the crux of it. Without having this on their mind and thinking about it and discussing it, because then it interrupts with their day-to-day activity and their productivity. But then, of course, in the back of their mind, if it's in it, then it affects morale and productivity. So it's a fine line that has to be walked between the communication and transparency and involving people at all levels. So on a situational basis. It's a good question. Good thing to think about, Tom.
Well, maybe that's a great opportunity to get yourself an IO psychologist. Thanks very much for that, Jeremy. Lots of hands up. Dr. Martha, let's go to you.
This topic is so well aligned with what has been on my mind for the last couple of weeks. We're going through changes. We're seeing new technologies. We're seeing changes in the workplace. And of course, if you're in management, especially middle management, then your pain, you're getting bombarded from every side. But one of the things that I've been thinking about is beyond the workplace, but of course it will apply to the workplace, which is filled with people, is how we are dealing, how well we're dealing with everything that is changing around us. We've gone as a species from a fairly straightforward approach to what is real, what's not real, what we can believe, what we can't believe. But the things that we are experiencing now, think about all of the things that technology can do. We went from filters for video type of exchanges to complete avatars that look like you, that have the same mannerisms that you, that if you don't know that's fake, you would not be able to pick that out. So the more and more that we are experiencing this as a species, the more uncertainty there is in our lives. So what people need is some kind of anchor, some kind of foundation, so that when you are in the storm of change, there are still things that you know are real, you know are true, you know you can hang on to and believe in. This is no different within an organization. So as an organization moves forward and navigates all of the changes and deals with all of its own challenges, it absolutely will behoove that organization to provide its employees with those anchors, with those foundational pieces that will allow them to weather the storm, whatever is happening within or outside of the organization. So rather than trying to be reactive or try to predict every single move that you have to make as a manager, as an organization, not saying that that's a bad thing, but rather than relying solely on that, work on those fundamentals, work on those anchors for your workforce, so that when you do experience that shakeup and all of the changes, you can get through it together and you will have some kind of foundation to help you get through it.
How much does that go to the culture of an organization? I mean, it does seem as like everything is changing. You're absolutely right. You know, thousands of years ago, they had a certain type of uh, stone spear tip, and over a few hundred years, it might change. I can't keep up with the latest iPhone. I really can't. I have an iPhone 5. It works. So should we be focusing on the culture of the organization and creating maybe a new culture that's never been seen in business before?
Culture is a big deal. And I think that historically, if we were to look at companies on a case by case basis, companies where culture is not welcomed or it's looked down upon or it's rejected are probably not doing business today. So culture does definitely play a big role in this.
Get yourself an IO psychologist and an artist.
For
That was
sure.
right. Thank you very much, Dr. Martha. Dr. Matt, let's go to you.
What Dr. Martha was just saying, a couple things that quickly are coming to mind. One, about the organizational culture, and to build off of that, your organizational culture is there whether you recognize it or not, whether you plan it or not, and it's not what's written on the walls. It's demonstrated in the behaviors and the actions that every employee takes, from that frontline employee who just started yesterday to the 30-year seniority tenured employee who's like 5 weeks away from retirement. All of those behaviors collectively represent your culture, and whatever that culture is going to likely give strong insight as to how your organization will weather turbulent times, challenging times. Because whether you choose to go through it by getting the newer iPhone, or whether it's thrown on you like the COVID pandemic, you're going to go through those challenging times, and it's how your culture and how your people respond. All of those pieces are intertwined. I've mentioned it before, and I don't want to be a broken record, but with my dissertation, I looked at how leaders navigated uncertainty during the COVID pandemic, during 2020 through 2023 or 22. And a lot of that was doing similar to what Dr. Jeremy had said, asking, because when the research was ongoing, a lot of their experiences had already taken place. They were still experiencing those challenging and uncertain times, but it had already taken place. So a lot of the question was, how did you do it? Because obviously you've made it through somehow. And so if we can find a way to learn from that, and leaders face significant uncertainty during turbulent times, but they demonstrate that adaptive leadership and that leadership agility by focusing on a number of things, whether it's situational awareness, flexible decision making, continuous learning, or just taking a step back and saying, what do I need in this moment, and do my people need that as well? So while they may not have all the answers, their ability to pivot lies it's in leveraging those existing strengths and prioritizing the immediate needs, even if they don't know what those needs are. It's almost like just a basic. There were a few that in the research where they said, I didn't know what to do, but in that moment I thought, what is it that I need? What am I struggling with? And you know what? My people are probably struggling with that too. So when you go beyond that and you say, okay, well, here's kind of what you did in that moment. Now that we're out of that moment, how do you build on those capabilities, or how do leaders build on those capabilities in non-turbulent times, so that if or when times become turbulent again, leaders can have that strong foundation on which to remain steadfast, or as steadfast as they can. And to Dr. Martha's point, to try and have an answer ahead of time and predict any and every piece of turbulence that could come your way is, one, not possible, and two, exhausting. So rather than trying to say we need to have a direct answer for every specific element, operating in that gray area and saying, what does it look like for us to have that adaptive leadership style, that leadership agility style that can, the adaptive piece is more like a slow burn. It's okay. This is trending in that direction. What does it look like for us to learn and to grow and to evolve in this direction? Whereas the agility is, this just happened and we need to respond quickly. And by building those skill sets in non-turbulent times, you prepare yourself to better navigate in those turbulent times. Are you going to get it right? No. Are you going to be more prepared? Yes. And so that's where, for our third plug in the first 20 minutes, getting yourself an IO can help you ask those questions and find that anchor that Dr. Martha was talking about, so that when the storm comes and your boat is rocking all over, you have something that's at least holding you down a little bit stronger, with a more solid foundation to navigate and lead your team and your people and your organization. That's going to come through in your culture as well. When we talk about things like the trending term, the Great Resignation, there were a number of factors that influenced that, but one of those was that people started to see, when stuff hit the fan, here's how my company or my leaders responded. I held on tight until that was done, but I realized when I go through that, I don't want to go through it with them again. And again, that's one of many factors. But my point, though, is when you have those stronger anchors that you have built and developed over time in non-turbulent times, you prepare yourself and you strengthen your ability to remain adaptive and agile when that happens, whether you choose it or not.
I'd love to ask you this, because you have looked at this through your thesis, and this is a totally unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. If you could give American business a letter grade on how we are doing, moving through turbulent times, we get through, that's a solid D in my mind, but not a very good grade. But you've looked at, some organizations. So I'd love to hear your opinion on, what's your letter grade for American business?
I've got two letter grades. The first letter grade is for American business. I'd say a C. And to steal a quote from my uncle, anything over a C is excessive. And so C's get degrees. It says, hey, we're doing okay, but there's definitely room for improvement. But I would go beyond that, and I would say specifically middle managers. I would give middle managers a high B, because holy cow, do they have stuff thrown at them from all different sides, especially during those turbulent times when, what was shared earlier, very rightfully so, the communication doesn't always happen, because there's not time, and two, we just have to act quickly. In one of our past episodes, Lee gave a great example of, this is not a time for me to explain it to you. You need to just trust me on this. Well, when that's all your frontline is hearing, and your middle management's hearing some of it and saying, but just don't relay this, and your people are saying, tell me more, the middle management's getting squeezed from both sides, and their ability to navigate, they are the backbone of those organizations. They are holding that together. So I give them a high B, because of the added stress and strain that's put on that job role, and for them to be able to persevere, they're doing a dang good job.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much. Emmy, let's go to you.
I love the grading process there. I'm a cynic, so my grades aren't as high, but that's okay.
I know.
Um, so I love the concept of using really metaphors for this, and I've heard things like storm and anchor and just different visual elements that kind of help us understand some of this. And I wanted to give a couple of brief quotes that my late father used to say that are really, into me, very interesting in terms of a dual perspective. So one of them was change is the only constant, which I think we hear in a lot of different places. But also he used to say boring is good, which to me is almost the opposite of kind of embracing change, right? And so I think to me that speaks to acknowledging versus embracing. So are you an acknowledger that change or adaptation is required? And are you taking the next step and embracing it, right? And so if you're not embracing it, I think that's where the opportunity lies, right? And embracing what it looks like to change and what that means practically. I'm a big proponent of using theory in practical application and taking it to that next step, not just understanding the theory and what data says, but then how do I apply this in my organizational setting, I think is extremely important. And one of the strategies that can be used to help people adapt is building that culture that we talked about, right? But what does that look like? And culture of innovation is really what comes to mind. I know it's kind of a buzzword in that space, but a culture of innovation is what enfolds the agility into your organization. So that could be cultural agility, that could be organizational agility, leadership agility. There are different kinds of agility. Even in the technology space, it's a buzzword out in software development to be agile and to be flexible in how you respond to customer needs. And so building that into your culture and creating a culture of innovation allows you to do things like experiment or have contingency plans or be flexible with your contingency plans. I've previously mentioned one of my favorite Dwight D. Eisenhower quotes, which is plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So maybe you've got plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, maybe you've got a plan on how you're going to plan if something happens, right? And so that's really the practical steps you can take. Doesn't mean you have it all outlined, and it doesn't mean you're going to get it perfect. In fact, most of the time you're just going to get it wrong-ish, right? But having some of it right-ish or knowing what you can do in certain scenarios is going to be really helpful. And the plane example gives me a kind of an anchor for that. The turbulent plane example. I mean, not that we pay attention anymore, right? But why don't we pay attention? Because we know the drill, right? We know that in the event of a water landing, we do these things and those things. And so there's a plan, right? And not that that plan is going to come if, God forbid, you ever in a plane going down into water. So you've got that anchor of knowing what the plan is based on your previous experience, 100,000 times of them telling you what to do. So you know where the lights are on the plane, and you know where the exits are, and you know all of those things during that moment because you have been trained, you have been socialized into the emergency procedures, and somebody made the plan for what that looks like in the safest exit in the plane, right? And so just using that parallel, I think, gives us warrants use of documentation in some sense, right? Even so, that's the practical application in my mind of having some on paper plans of what change is going to look like during non-turbulent times, right? I think Dr. Matt mentioned that. So when things are at your steady state or in your calm waters, looking into the future and saying, okay, based on history or based on what we're expecting and anticipating, and the area of futurism or futurists really can help you kind of navigate what it looks like and what things are coming. So you can start kind of looking in your market or in your business area, what's coming down the pike, and being able to make some sense of planning as part of your culture of innovation, not just leaving it to say, oh, we're going to just adapt. Like knowing what that might look like, practically speaking, is very important. And situational leadership has really been mentioned a little bit, so I wanted to touch on that as well. I think knowing how to navigate situations and adapting your style of an approach to those circumstances is very important. I think that we don't talk enough about what situational or adaptive leadership looks like from an actual practical standpoint, but there are many roles that can teach us things about that. So when you think about things like a police officer, right? They've got to know in the circumstance what it looks like to respond based on the law or what orders they've got or their chain of command or all of these things. So we can look at a lot of different roles and areas that will help us understand adaptation and situational leadership. And just lastly, embracing risk, I think, is a hard thing for people. Obviously, especially where there's money on the line. So I'm not saying, risk it all and put all your money on the line. But one of the terms that I heard early in my career that I just fell in love with was the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And I am a big BHAG girl, mostly because I have, I think, that situational mindset that we can adapt as we go along. But I love a good BHAG, a good big, hairy, audacious goal in an organization. And that's built into that culture of agility, helps you adapt. I think knowing that these things are big, turbulence is big, disruption is big, adapting is going to be big in response, right? So just knowing that you've got something audacious in that space and building it into the culture.
I'd love to ask you a question around coaching because, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, most of the people on this panel are entrepreneurs. We're very good at getting coaching, but businesses, some of them are bringing in coaching, but, having a futurist talk to a mom and pop operation about their future and how things are changing and some avenues for them to expand. Are we going to get into, is this now the time of coaches where all organizations are going to have to rely on a team of outside experts to help them guide themselves?
So I don't know that it's like an imperative for everyone, but I certainly can make a case for it being really important for anyone. And so I think that the biggest application there, I mean, a coach or someone that helps you see the greater picture or the perspective a little bit larger or the system in which you're a part of. I think that to me is the part where people tend to lack in organizational spaces. There's a picture that comes to mind of these people in a boat, and there's a hole in one side of it, and the people on the other side that aren't sinking, quote unquote, they're on the high side. They're like, oh, I'm glad it's not on my side. Well, having that sort of look at it, it's like, well, actually, you'll be sinking right after they will. And so knowing that you don't really always look at systems that way, or the system in which you're a part of, which can be your community, it can be your nation, it can be the global system, right? That's, I think, where coaching helps you expand your perspective, look at the full system in which you're a part of and how you're going to be impacted by certain changes out, whether they are environmental changes, social changes, internal organizational changes that you're not noticing because you can't see everything. You're not in every department. That, I think, is going to be the real value of coaching. And so I can't say for sure everyone needs one, but anyone would value that or could gain value from that dramatically, yes.
Thank you very much for that. Lee, good to see you as always. Let's go to you.
Yeah, to go back to my Navy days, we talked about being semper gumby, always flexible, and you have to, because when stuff goes to pot, you got to be ready to do things. And another thing is, we say we fight how we train. So if you don't practice in the small swells, when the big waves come, you're just going to capsize because you don't know what to do. I think it was Mike Tyson that says everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So, that goes to Emmy's, point of having plan, A, B, C, D, whatever. And, it's extremely important to be able to, adapt on the fly. But we also have to remember that there's more than one aspect of this. So, jumping into the psychology part of this, you have company culture, you have, organizational adapting, you have all these things, but you also have to remember that an organization is made up of people, and people react differently to different stimuli. And you can have a handful of people who all witness the very same event. Some will be bored, some will be excited, some will have PTSD because they experienced that event differently. And so we have to be cognizant of that. I mean, think about, the big events, 9/11, something like that. It affected all of us, but it affected people in different ways. Some people, were in the fetal position, unable to move. Some people were just like, some people were, signing up to give blood or signing up to join the military, various things that everybody reacted differently because we had no idea. We hadn't had anything even remotely that big since Pearl Harbor. We had no idea how to respond to this. So do we have anything that big going on right now? Thank God, no. But, COVID, we didn't know how to respond to that, because, I mean, when was the Spanish flu? Like, the early 1900s, but we have to have these contingencies. You have to know what's going on outside your organization and your employees' lives. This is where, to Dr. Matt's thing, the middle managers, you need to know your people. You need to know, you don't need to know all the gory details of their lives. I mean, in fact, maybe you shouldn't, but you need to know when something's going on, because you need to be able to deal with that in some way. You have to make sure that they know the resources that your organization has that might help them through a challenging time. Going back to the military, I just had to take our usual death by PowerPoint, training every year. So one of the things is about espionage, which is a thing in the civilian world as well. Well, what happens there? Well, a lot of times it's stressors. A lot of times it's disgruntlement. A lot of times it's financial. When you go through a security clearance investigation, it's not whether or not you did something, it's whether or not you're willing to admit it in many cases. Because if you'll admit it, it can't be used against you. So that takes out the whole blackmail portion of that, to where that can be used, if you don't get me this information, I'm going to tell, somebody something. So it's important to know when you have those stressors, because those things can push people to do kind of irrational things that they might not otherwise do, which could be damaging to themselves and damaging to your organization. And so, there's two ways to go with this, the top to bottom and bottom to top, but you got to meet in the middle. And that's where those middle managers are so crucial. And again, kind of just to ping off what we've said before about the communication, when it's smooth sailing, be completely transparent as much as humanly possible. Tell your people what's going on. Build that trust, so that when you get to that moment, when the swells are coming and the ship is rocking, you can say, I need you to trust me right now. I will explain this later. But it's not going to work if you haven't established that trust. And it's not going to work if that's all you ever do. So you have to be transparent. You really have to foster that communication and that trust within your organization, so that when those times come, people are willing to accept, I'll tell you later, as the answer. And then tell them later. That's a key part of this, because it only takes once to ruin everything that you've done. When you don't come back and you level with your people, you have destroyed all the work that you've done. It only takes once. So yeah, we definitely got to work on it. And a lot of organizations are not very good at the whole communication and transparency thing. And a lot of people out there like that black box working, and not a good paradigm, really.
And IO psychologists are very good at communication. So once again, thank you very much, Lee. Natasha, good to see you again. Let's go to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So it was great listening to everyone's perspectives and experiences there on this topic. And I can't help but think, as we use the analogy of turbulence, to really think about what happened recently at the airports, where all of the systems went down, all the flights were delayed. And not only did it affect flights at the airport, but it also affected a lot of organizations by way of the CrowdStride. Here we go, CrowdStride blackout. And when we think about that, the first thing that came to mind is, what was the backup plan for anyone who did not anticipate that happening on that day? Meaning that, as Dr. Martha mentioned earlier, we shouldn't go down a rabbit hole of trying to mitigate for to have a plan for every situation that might possibly come about. But when we understand our organization, when we understand the nature of our organizations, responsible organizations do spend time with risk management, mitigating risks, understanding what are the risks that may come about to our specific industry that might inhibit us from doing our day-to-day or being able to meet the needs of our various client groups. And so I think that the word risk management, as I mentioned, should always be a high priority. Organizations should always and need to be very expansive in their thinking. They need to be proactive and expansive in their thinking and their planning for what are these, risk management plans in the event that something were to happen, but also attune with the expansive needs of their employees to include how do we navigate through change? A comment that was made earlier that I don't necessarily agree with, well, I partially agree with. Yes, employees are excited for change, but they're only excited for change that benefits them. So what then do we do when the change does not benefit the employee and brings about ambiguity or the fear of potentially losing a job, not getting promotions, being demotions, or a general sense of loss, something that we once had and we were once comfortable in the knowledge of this process or system or thing that benefit that we had, we no longer have it, or it's going to change. And now there is a sense of loss. And I think that organizations really need to, in that vein, people are not great at change. People are actually afraid of change. But with the knowledge of knowing that people get excited about the change that benefits them, organizations need to be better at communicating change, preparing people for change, and also getting the buy-in for the change by letting them know what they will benefit from getting on board with that change early. And I think that to that end, you also have to think about who are the people that will automatically buy in, because you don't need to sway them anymore. They already buy in. Then who is your 50-50 group? The people who are still indecisive, because those people, you can actually convince them and give them a great argument to buy into it. And those are the two groups you mostly focus on, because a person who is not determined to buy into said change is not going to. And with time, you allow them to see that the change is actually benefiting them more than it is creating, a negative impact or fear. But I think that to the grading point that we were doing earlier, Dr. Matt, in rating America a C, I think that when it comes down to change, especially since COVID, it has exposed how badly a lot of organizations are in terms of communicating change, adapting to change, and guiding employees through change. And we see that show up in various ways. And I think that to that end, we really need to give thought to, are we going to continue down that route as organizations, or do we have to be better? And if we don't know how to do better, I can't echo enough, the chorus that we've been singing over and over: hire an IO specialist, hire a human resources manager or consultant, cough, cough, i.e. myself, who has the heart and mind of an IO, a psychologist. I'm just saying, your employees deserve better. Your organization can do much better, deserves much better. And so, those are my thoughts for today.
And those are great thoughts. I always love what you have to say, Natasha. It's like a view from the front line. So thank you very much for that. Dr. Jeremy, let's go back to you.
Well, was thinking, if somebody's already in turbulent times, they're probably going to have some kind of momentum. If a company, I mean, just a team can be in a turbulent time. So there's an opportunity there to be proactive. And if you're in turbulent times and have momentum, maybe it's time to say, hey, where can we be a disruptor? And how can we use this momentum to keep going forward? And then you can start to identify individuals in your team or organizations that are change leaders and get them fired up. I was thinking about this piece of proactive. Then if you're on a plane, you're sitting there with your laptop maybe on your little tray table, and you see like you're going to enter a storm. You see some dark clouds and some lightning ahead. Well, if you're proactive, you put your laptop away and you put your tray up. And if you're not proactive, you hit the turbulence, the laptop hits you in the head, cuts you, and you get knocked out. So it pays to be proactive. So what would happen if you just, for fun, if you're a leader of a team, leader of in an organization, why not create a plan for turbulent times? If you do that, that way, if you're not in turbulent times, you can still. So what does a plan for turbulent time means? You want to be resilient and you want to build strength for that turbulence. So if you're wanting to build strength and resilience, that sounds like something any organization or team would need. So if you build a plan for turbulent times and you're not in turbulent times, you can start to pick and choose some of those things that you were going to do and enact that plan for turbulent times, even though it's not turbulent times, to build strength and resolve in your team or in your organization. To get other people involved, it's a simple exercise that a lot of people don't do. List your team's skills. You can even just have simple conversations. What are you good at? Like, what are you really good at? And have people tell you. Then you got to get a little bit of the buy-in, a little bit of that fire underneath their seat. It's very simple. You talk to an employee. You want this. You're good at this. Here's what you can use what you're good at to get where you want and to get us to where we want to be. And now you're talking about turbulent times. You got to list down. You have creative people and you have problem solvers. Sometimes your people are both. Start to look at all the things that could go wrong during a turbulent time, or if you're in a turbulent time, all the things that could go wrong next. We talk about the big, hairy, audacious goals. What about the big, hairy, audacious things that could happen next? And then start to get people problem solving. If you're creative, you like thinking about what could happen next. If you're a problem solver, you like solving those problems. It's a way to get people involved and to get skin in the game with an activity that actually energizes them. And I want to also mention some of the blueprint. We mentioned articles can be good blueprints for this. And the one article, How to Cope with a Turbulent Environment, which is in the show notes and in what we shared today, they break down in a lot of different tables. And two of their tables list very specifically how to cope with a turbulent environment. And they break it down based on all the research. They break it down by organizational structure, leadership, human resources, corporate culture, and strategy. So again, here's a particular blueprint, which you can actually pick and choose a couple different ideas from the research on what to do. For example, you might say, all right, for now, for our team, we're going to have to go to a more flat team. We're going to have to go more like for the organization. Maybe we break our teams into more small and focused units. Okay, so that's one idea for the organizational structure. For leadership, some examples are create bottom-up entrepreneurship, basically get that idea generation, get everyone really excited about possibilities, reward and support new initiatives, among all kinds of other things for leadership. And for human resources, of the 6 examples there, you've got bring in new members with a variety of backgrounds, train different people and different job experiences, use job rotations. For corporate culture, there's a lot that you can adopt. Some examples are start to use informal straight talk, incorporate a social norm of give and take within the organization, eliminate rules, encourage risk taking, etc. You've also got some ideas for very specific strategies. One might be change the traditional approach to strategy experimentation, incorporate rapid learning, get everyone on board with that. Think about strategic flexibility. In this other article, there's also a nice blueprint, which I won't go into as much detail. This is the article, Navigating Corporate Turbulence, Strategies for Managing Companies During Crisis. And there's a table there, full blown. Recommendation for companies to overcome crisis. They have the area, which might be business continuity planning or cost management or strategic communication. Then they have very specific recommendations. Then they have an actual description of it. So again, there's so much done by people who are doing it, performing this research in actual businesses, in actual companies, and how these companies are overcoming either crisis events or more slow burn turbulence. Everything's at our fingertips. We just have to do a little work to find it. And 7,000th plug, hire an IO. Tom.
Well, this question has been evolving sort of in my head as we've been having this discussion today, but in the early 1900s, the Industrial Revolution is, going strong. All of a sudden there's a community, all of a sudden they build a factory, and that factory, its only responsibility is to hire employees. They get paid, and that helps the local economy. But what kind of citizens they were or what they did outside that employment, no one really cared about. You were there to fulfill a role. But today it seems, especially with all the advice we hear on Work Cookie and other sources that are out there, that it's transitioned a bit where my question is, do organizations today have a responsibility to create good citizens? Is it the break between work and the outside life? We're all talking about work-life balance now. So are we getting into a place where organizations have to take more of a civic responsibility for their employees and help develop them?
I don't know the answer to that one, Tom. I would say it's their responsibility to create good citizens internally for the company. I don't know the answer to the second, so I will not opine on it for now. It's a good one.
Well, maybe someone could write a book on that. Thank you very much, Dr. Jeremy. Rich, good to see you again. Let's go to you.
Sure. Hey, so that's interesting that you said that, Tom, because I'm thinking like Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is like literally built for the Hershey factory, right? That was, that there was a lot of, there was a whole society built around that factory, and I'd have to argue. I mean, there were some good people, and there was some good work that came out of that. I also just recently watched Oppenheimer, that they built the whole town just for the scientists. Arguably, the ethics of all of that, is something that can be discussed at another time. But people were brought together to do this project. So, but what I wanted to chime in on was, and Tom, you might appreciate this. So I'm going to bring in a little Broadway into this. So there was there's a show, Come From Away. So Come From Away is about 38 planes that were grounded during 9/11. So Lee coming back to 9/11 there, where unprecedented little town in Newfoundland. So there you go, Tom, in Canada. And, so first of all, you have the authorities that are there who are doing the protocols that they're trained to do, right? Keep them on the plane, keep them occupied, make them a little drunk, but, do what you can to calm down. But that doesn't last for days and days and days on end, right? And so what ended up happening is that, the authorities there had to relinquish some of the power, and elicit feedback from other people that were on the plane. So you had, you've got a community of people that actually, it was an ad hoc community, but they had to come together and do a lot of problem solving, and people were put in charge of meals, people were put in charge of healthcare, people were put in charge of um, translation, right? So and in the end, you had kind of a community that was gelling around, keeping everybody sustained, right? So I guess kind of the lesson here, and going back to kind of what Jeremy was saying, was, take an assessment of the skills, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of KSAOs that and other characteristics, right, that we have available in our organizations. And so as much as you can have a plan, and they did come up with plans, right? But I think you also have to be flexible enough to elicit feedback and be, kind of wear your vaudeville tomato suit, to understand that somebody's gonna have some conflict with you, and be ready to adapt and change and kind of roll with a different plan of attack.
Thank you very much for that, Rich. And if you haven't seen Come From Away, it is on tour right now. Matter of fact, if you are in Cleveland, it opens next week, and then it's going to do a little tour of the West Coast later in the fall. So the best Canadian musical since Anne of Green Gables.
Right on. And it's so resourceful. Like, they just move chairs around. It's amazing.
Talk about turbulent times. Thanks very much, Rich. Emmy, let's go back to you.
I just wrote that name down. I'll have to check it out. Thanks, y'all. I wanted to touch on a couple things. I just, in terms of the Hershey, it reminded me of where I live. I live in Sugar Land, Texas, and it's not because we're all sweet, but it actually is because of Imperial sugar. And so there was an entire community built around Imperial sugar here. And so I actually have a familial link to that through my daughter now, and some friends she's got. So super, super cool to look at the entire community that's impacted by one organization, and how how that really relates to social responsibility and corporate responsibility to the community. I also wanted to touch just briefly on one of Natasha's points about risk management. I think that's such a practical conversation to have in organizations, and it really has to be balanced with innovation, right? When you think about the amount of risk involved in innovation, and we talked a little bit about culture of innovation earlier and what that looks like, and embracing risk, right? I think that warrants making note of risk tolerance, and making sure that we understand what that tolerance is as a part of our risk planning and our risk management. Because I'm a big fan of taking intelligent risks, I'll call it that, risks that have been vetted, ideas that have been researched, data that has been looked at, right? So those are ways to be careful about your risk. I don't suggest just going off on a deep dive and just doing whatever you feel like. There needs to be purpose. There needs to be an assessment that is data backed, and to the point earlier about having someone that's a coach or a mentor, even an IO psychologist, that helps you look at that risk and assess it from that perspective. And one of the other notes made there is about loss, right? And professional grief is an element there, I think, that we don't talk enough about. We're just expected to digest it and take it to our therapists, right? And say, okay, how do I go and handle this with my own personal time and with my own finances that I'm paying with my copay with my therapist, right? And so that, I think, is something that organizations should absolutely be taking on, is helping their resources process professional grief in times where change equals loss, and change equals something that is not necessarily beneficial. And when we need to elicit help or champions, I think is really what Natasha was kind of getting at there, change champions, right? What does that look like in creating a benefit where one doesn't exist? And I think that can be done very practically, even at low cost, creating something that the employees will get as an incentive or some sort of benefit in exchange for what they've lost. And a quick example, there's a lighting company that during COVID, they had a brick and mortar store that closed because you couldn't go to the stores for a little while. And so what did they do? They sent their employees home, and they wanted to keep most of their resources, if not all of them. And they decided to make themselves an online factory instead, or an online shopping. And they actually catered to companies that, or people that were working at home. What does at-home lighting need? What are your at-home lighting needs for your home office? Which, it's a niche area, but the riches are in the niches, is what I've heard in the business sense, right? And so that was how they transformed that, right? And they created incentives for their employees that if they could have ideas that had a financial benefit or impact to their new online retailer scenario before they closed their brick and mortar, that those employees would have some sort of a tangible benefit. So they were incentivized to find an idea that would work, and they ended up finding that market of at-home lighting, but also at-home lighting that's specifically related to the remote office and your setup there, and making sure that it was a bright space for you, right? And so this is just a cool example, and I love using case studies as learning. And so I think that's a way that organizations can also just look at different case studies for your market area, your leadership area, whatever it is. Learning from others is a great way to not have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you very much for that. We've got 3 speakers left. We're getting a little short in time, but we've got time to get through you. So Dr. Matt, let's go to you.
I'll try to be brief. I will be brief. Dr. Jeremy, I am going to take a stab at Tom's question about do organizations have that responsibility to create good citizens, or to have that civic responsibility? To clarify, I am not an expert in that field of research, but from what I've seen, here's why I will take a stab at that. A lot of business has revolved around the model from the early 1970s. The Milton Friedman social responsibility of business is to increase its profits for its shareholders. That's been 55 years, and we're still following this principle that really was sort of founded off of not much. And so something like that can only last for so long before factors and before things with inside organizations start to reject that. And that's what we've seen over the last, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, is a lot of that resistance to that idea that no, it's not stockholder or shareholder value above all else. Research is showing that yes, there's a benefit. It is for your business. It's for the benefit of your business when you do take care of your people, and when you do invest in their well-being and in their development and in their civic responsibility. You have a responsibility as an organization to keep that going. My friends don't like to play, or my friends don't really like to play Monopoly with me because I play a little bit differently. People play Monopoly with the intention of to own all the properties and make everyone go bankrupt. I win. I don't. I'm a little bit more evil. When I play, I like to put just enough properties where you have just enough money to make it around the board without going bankrupt, and you're continuing to pay me. It's a very terrible way to play, but I like to do that. But in a similar sense, with to take that and put it into an organizational sense for the leader that says, yeah, but you know what, stockholders, shareholders, that's what brings in our money. That is going to be my priority. Here's where I'm going to challenge you a little bit. If you go pedal to the metal and that's all you focus on, you're going to bankrupt the other players and you're going to destroy your environment in which your company operates. You look at the Rust Belts, you look at some of the industrial areas that were just totally decimated, and those communities have never come back. Whereas if you say, you know what, maybe instead of putting shareholder value above everything else, if we take care of our people and we invest in their well-being and in their civic responsibility, if we do our civic part to our community, wherever that may be, local, region, global, we support that system that's going to allow our customers to continue to be there. Our services continue to be needed. And so there's that benefit and there's that responsibility for the organization to create those good citizens and to have that civic responsibility. There's a couple other points that I'd written down, but I want to make sure we get to the other speakers. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to them.
Well, I'm glad you got to that point. Thank you very much, Dr. Matt. Dr. Martha, let's go to you.
I think today's episode is like no other in terms of imagery, from planes crashing, ships sinking, being punched in the face by Mike Tyson, and playing Monopoly with Dr. Matt. You can't top that. But moving on to adaptive leadership, we talked a little bit about those things that are the changes that come with the passage of time, with the advancements of technologies. And then we also talked about some of those disasters, maybe worst case scenarios. And while planning for those different things will have some overlap, there will be differences. But the bottom line is this, that when change happens, whether it's the worst case scenario, whether it's new technology, whatever it is, leaders have to be able to somehow work that and survive that and lead effectively. And the other thing that, once again, I'm seeing today, we're trying to categorize and put into boxes change. People like change, people don't like change. People are good at change, people are bad at change. All of those are wrong and all of those are right. You know why? Because people are different. Some people thrive changing. They cannot stick with the same thing for more than 24 hours, and other people never change anything in 40 years. So a leader has to not only be able to navigate all kinds of change, they also have to know how to cater to the variety of employees that they have within their workforce. That's when somebody who knows a little bit something about psychology can come in handy. So get yourself an IO psychologist. Bada bing, bada boom, you're all set.
There you go. And tune into Work Cookie for some very smart people and what they have to say. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Martha. Natasha, let's go to you.
Yes, so just in closing, I think I wanted to jump on a point that Emmy made about, you know, in the areas where there is a loss, how do we incentivize employees? And, you know, having been on the front line of this before, oftentimes there are no incentives to these losses. There are no incentives to the changes that we are navigating, other than we have to make these changes or we have to make these decisions in order, you know, for us to have better times ahead or for us to stay afloat. And an example of that I wanted to give real quickly. In the midst of COVID, I worked for an organization, and it was in the midst of everyone having layoffs all over. Our organization, rather than laying off our employees, took a different approach. And the approach was, every employee that makes a certain amount of money, I do know the threshold, but for the purposes, I'm not going to mention it. That meets a specific salary threshold would see up to a 20% salary decrease. And we're doing this to ensure that we do not have to have any layoffs and everybody keeps their jobs. Up to 20% salary pay cut is a lot, but guess what? It is a loss for the person who actually gets that 20%. But people were so happy to be able to ensure that not only they kept their jobs, but the people that they work with, love and know, or even hate in some instance, kept their jobs. And so there was a loss, but at the end of the day, the loss that they experienced was more preventative in order to still be able to say that no one lost a job. Because again, the next point of action would be, okay, if we don't do this and people have to lose jobs, who's gonna lose jobs? And so I think that, again, it goes back to the essence of really planning for having a risk management plan, which is, identifying, analyzing, evaluating the various threats or losses that an organization might be exposed to and have a contingency plan for that in the event that it does occur. And even during the quiet years when nothing at all is happening, being able to monitor or reevaluate the systems that we have in place, that very same contingency plan. And even when there is turbulence, being able to adjust, be flexible, adaptable, as you say, maybe say, hey, this is what we had planned. but what we had planned is not is not equipped for what we are experiencing, and therefore, how do we pivot? How do we adjust? And as we pivot and adjust, we modify. And when we are no longer in those turbulent times, what have we learned? What needs to change? And what can we apply for the future? And again, we can never stress enough, communicate, 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 because you do need, if not the buy-in of your employees, but understand their understanding and trust in your leadership, and knowing that whatever it is that you are changing in this turbulent times is one that is for the greater good rather than just company bottom line.
Thank you very much for that, Natasha. Jeremy, once again, a great conversation today.
Tom, I'm over here. I'm spacing out, just trying to, I'm going back to your question to that. Because I think the original question was, is it a company's responsibility to create good citizens out of their employees? So corporate social responsibility is one thing. I took it as, and I'm still thinking about this, while they're working, if it's like, hey, let's get back to the community, you're on the clock kind of a thing, that's a different story. If it's, person X who wants to get off work and just, paint model cars and not do volunteering, I don't think it's the company's responsibility to tell him quit painting model cars and, go volunteer. So that there's a conversation to be had. But overall, with corporate social responsibility, look at the reality of it. Are they doing it to really, I mean, some companies are, because there is actual value in giving back to, especially the smaller communities. You give them more money, they have more money to buy your product, that kind of thing. But you see these 18-wheelers on the highway, and they've got those aerodynamic side fenders. And it says on the back, hey, we're a responsible organization for the environment. We're saving gasoline and emissions. Do we really think that they would be spending all the money on those fenders if it didn't help with their miles per gallon and save the company money on gas? It looks good, but if it only looks good for the public, are they going to do it? What is the added benefit? So again, it's a whole nother conversation with that. It's weird how one question, Tom, can just get the mind going. The power of a good question, which, Tom, my friend, you're always a good master of. Next week, we continue this. My mind is still going. We continue the topic. So next week is going to be communication in crisis, guiding your team through uncertainty. And I do believe it'll be LindaAnn leading that conversation next week. Again, these are open mic events. Feel free to come and join, and still lots of events on our events page on the CBlock site.
And I see there's more and more local meets happening with CBlock, different parts of the country.
Yeah, we've got Southeast now. So we've got Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Rocky Mountain. Yeah, I think those are the regions that we have for the meetups, and some happen to be in person as well.
And I'm still waiting for an IO in Western Canada to organize one so I can go.
Tom, you that'd be you.
Oh.
Start one up. But yeah, if anyone does want to start with regional events, especially if you're in the Canada area, please let us know. And especially in Canada, Tom will be sure to go to yours.
There we go. All right, thank you very much. Great discussion again, and thank you everyone for participating today. And for those who were just listening, it was great to have you here. And if you are looking for something to do at noon on Thursdays every single week, join us here at Work Cookie and share your voice with our live podcast. And you can find that information once again at cbock.com. So thank you again, everybody. And Jeremy, if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
Thanks, Tom, and everyone. Counting out in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.